Hey, and what do you know? This is the Melbourne Live show. And today, thank you for joining me here today. Today, I want to talk about a recent topic, right? And the recent topic is essentially is Apple's announcement to transit from Intel chip to their very own processor itself, which they have called M1 chip. Now, why is that so important, and what is the reason why we are talking about that in this show where it's supposed to be about the one person 1 million all digital business? Now the fact is this: um, when we look at many of these companies, what we want to do is to be able to study their strategy and then to be able to deconstruct that and see what aspect of it we can apply and what aspect of it we can learn from it. And so today's episode itself, what I'm going to share with you is what we can learn from Apple's transition from the Intel chip to their M1 chip for their Mac itself. Now, before that, I want to kind of bring you, um, you know, the history part of Apple. So the year was 2006, and Steve Jobs at the point in time announced that Apple was going to drop the Motorola's Power PC chip for the Intel chip itself. And that announcement may have come as a shock to some people, but in fact, it was already in the works for many years prior. And one of the key decisions of moving to the Intel chip was the compatibility issue. And one of the thing was that because of the adoption of the Intel chip, that would have made it possible for the Mac to run Windows natively, right? And so that kind of like opens up a whole world of possibilities. But one of the things that really could have followed the entire transition, it's of course software, because the software that was written for the PowerPC chip and the software that was written for the Intel chip are different. And so, in other words, anyone who has created an app or a software for the PowerPC chip would then have to create the equivalent of the software to run on the Intel chip itself because it wouldn't work. And so Apple trying to make sure that this transition it's possible by coming up with a decoder, and that decoder is called Rosetta. And Rosetta's work it's essentially to be able to use the old apps that was found on the Power PC to be used on the new chip, which is the Intel chip itself. Now, when they did that transition back in 2006, it was phenomenal because it opens up a whole new world of how the Mac would be used. And it really doesn't make the Mac a totally different machine from the Windows PC itself, right? And so that kind of creates that whole new world possibility. And then in 2010, Apple decided that they wanted to invest heavily into the manufacturing of their own chip. And that's when they first introduced their own chips in the iPhones and the iPad. And so the chip that we have today on the iPhone and the iPad has improved tremendously because of the way that it handles battery life and because of the seamless integration between hardware and software. It has made this whole the performance and the efficiency of the iPhone a tremendous one to have. I mean, I have been on the Android platform for, I think, at least 5 to 6 years now. And I can tell you for a fact that until I make the transition back to the iPhone, I didn't know what I was missing in the sense of workflow, in a sense of efficiency, in a sense of being able to streamline my workflow and to really gain back my level of efficiency itself. And so when in 2020, Apple's announcement of the transition of their uh, into their own chip itself didn't actually come as so much of a surprise because you know it has been 10 years now that Apple has started the manufacturing design of their own chip itself. And so right now they are already ready to kind of implement that in the Mac OS system. And of course, with that itself, one of the things that it can be done is that now you are going to be able to run iPhone and iPad apps that you have already bought on the Mac. And of course, at this stage itself, there are still some apps or some software that runs on the Intel Mac that may not run properly on the Apple Silicon's Mac itself. And so this is where Rosetta 2 comes into play. But even with Rosetta 2, there are still going to be some hiccups along the way. So where does this leave us? Now, I would want to bring you to this whole scenario of why did Apple start off by investing in their own silicon design and starting with the iPhone and not the Mac itself? So, one way to look at this is if you dive deep into the revenue share of the iPhone versus the Mac itself, as well as if you look at the amount of market share compared to the other manufacturers, you would see that in fact the iPhone has over 50% share of the revenue for Apple since I think since 2012. And that has steadily been the case for the last 8 years, for example. Now, if you look at the Mac's contribution to Apple's bottom line, the figures that I have here, it's it's only close to, it's not even touching, it's barely touching 10%. So 50% versus 10%. Now, the way I look at it is that if I am going to be investing in something that's going to be revolutionary and something that's going to be able to allow me to make my hardware a lot more efficient and perform better with the software itself, I would definitely want to start off with a product that it's taking up a huge amount of my revenue, because that would also mean that it allows me to test my chip at a larger scale compared to if I were to put it in the Mac. Now, the other thing is that if they had put it in the Mac, they would really have to do a fair amount of convincing of the app developers to write new software for the Mac, because now it's going to be running on their own chip itself. And because of that, it's going to create an issue, and the transition wouldn't be so fluent, and also the transition is going to meet up with a lot of hiccups and roadblocks. First thing first, the Mac itself only contributes to a small percentage. So you might argue and say that, well, it contributes to a small percentage. And if they invest the money into designing their own chip for that small percentage, then even if they fail, it's not going to make much of an impact on the bottom line. And I would agree, but that's besides the point. So the way to look at it is as follows. Why did they pick the iPhone and not the Mac to start implementing their own silicon? And so the way to look at this is as follows. If you have a limited amount of resources and you want to dive deep into a certain project, because you know that if you're able to pull it off well, you are going to be able to increasingly make an impact on the user experience of your product. So if you are able to execute it, beautifully, then the workflow and as well as the user experience of your product is going to be tremendous. And so the way to do it is to go with the iPhone, because number one, it has a bigger market share or bigger revenue share compared to the Mac itself. So if we compare and say that, well, if they go in with the Mac first, what are some of the issues they're going to face? Number one, they are going to be looking at tinkling with a product which I would say that compared to the share of the PC market, it's still tiny. And so to really get people to want to not just use the Apple design chip on the Mac, it's going to be a tough sell. And on top of that, without the support of the apps itself, you're going to run into a lot of problems. And so, with that in mind, they have decided to implement it with the iPhone. So, reason number one, iPhone accounts for a bigger share of the revenue. And so, they probably have more resources to allocate some of that revenue into the investment of the design of the new chip. And so that's number one. Number two, the implementation and the widespread use of the iPhone would then allow them to literally test and stress test that usage of the own chip itself. And number three is that once they have succeeded with the iPhone, they can then now transit to the Mac OS environment. Because once they're able to do that, they no longer have to convince the app developers to actually write entirely new apps for the new architecture itself, because there will going to be the time whereby the iOS and iPad OS apps that can run on the Mac OS itself. And so, how does all this apply to us? I know for some of you watching, you'll be like, okay, all this sounds very technical and it seems to make sense, but how does it apply to us? Now, here's the way to look at it. As a one person, digital business owner itself, you would have limited resources. And when I say limited resources, I'm not just talking about money, I'm also talking about time, and I'm talking about energy as well. So, one of the main thing that for us as one person digital business owners, one of the main thing that we really must guard jealously would be our time and our energy. Because if we allow our time and energy to be squandered off, then at the end of the day, we would have very little time and energy to execute on the thing that we have to do in order to get our business started or in order to get our business to the next level. And so we really, uh, you know, we it will be foolish for us to think of investing our time, money, and resources as well as energy into an area that we are not quite sure if it is going to help us succeed. And so the way forward is this: if you are thinking about transiting from being an employee or a freelancer to a one person, 1 million old digital business, then the thing for you to do is the following: do not start something that you have no competitive advantage in. I mean, if you have never done an online course before, please do not think of creating one, or at least do not think of creating one all by yourself, because that isn't quite your forte. Your forte is the ability to be able to apply your knowledge, skills, and expertise to a particular situation. So let people like me, for example, to help you with implementing, with designing, and with developing your online courses. So that's point number one. Point number two is that doesn't mean that you are going to stay where you are, but you want to also be able to think strategically, right? Like, what are some of the things that you really need to put in place in order to get you there? And so, for example, for me, one of the key areas that I really want to put in place that is able to drive the revenue for me are in the area of software as well as a community. And why I say that, because at the end of the day, I want to be able to use this two engine to create that recurring income that is able to allow me to maintain or sustain or support a particular lifestyle that I want. And if I am investing all my time just to create the bare minimum in terms of money to sustain my lifestyle, then at best I would just be surviving. I would never be able to reach that 1 million benchmark. And so what I want to do is to devote a part of my time, devote a part of my resources, devote a part of my energy into building this one thing that is able to give you that recurring income. So the one thing for you may be different from the one thing for me, because a lot of time, I hate to say this, but a lot of time, many of the people that I spoke to who wants to start their own business, essentially they're saying that, well, I have an expertise And instead of letting someone earn the money, why not? I'm going to do it all myself. And so instead of just sharing, getting 30% of it, I'm getting a full 100% of everything. Right. So that is one way to look at it. But in the long run, that is not going to help, because unless in that time itself that you are generating the income, you are generating more or exceedingly more than what is required for you to maintain a certain lifestyle. So unless you're able to generate or create wealth through that manner itself, you're going to end up with a situation whereby it's going to be worse than being retrenched. And the word, it's you're going to be made irrelevant. And that's something you want to avoid. So make sure you invest the time and the energy into an area that is able to build up this amount of that system that is able to help you achieve that, right? And so for me, that system is build your flywheel. So if you have not checked out build your flywheel, do go down to buildyourflywheel.com and sign up for the free 4-part audio course, which I have done to help you think about how to create and how to build your flywheel itself, right? And the last part is the following: always think of the ecosystem rather than just looking at your own self. So, as an example, when Apple is looking to develop and to design and to implement their own chip, they weren't just thinking about themselves, but they were also looking at the adoption of the users as well as the acceptance of the developers to create apps for that platform itself. So, my friends, there are tremendous lessons that we can learn in any business itself. The truth is that, are you just looking, or are you able to see what other people are not able to see? And so that's part of my strength. And if you want more such insights, make sure you subscribe to this channel. And better still, make sure you subscribe to my newsletter at melvin.me, because that's where you will be able to get insights like this and how you can apply it to your own one person, 1 million, or digital business. Right. And so with that, I thank you so much for watching. And yeah, and as always, if you got a question, feel free to leave it in the comments, and I'll be more than glad to answer them. And with that, and if you have an area that you want me to cover, well, you can leave it in the comment as well, and I will see what I can do with that. All right. And so thank you for watching, and catch you guys on the next one. Bye bye.